Hello and welcome to the second episode of History Bubble, Argentina. Last time we talked about the War for Independence, where Argentina had gotten their independence and helped to liberate Chile. But they now faced a new problem, that of factionalism and a civil war. The first major case of this started in modern-day Uruguay, where the Liga Federal had formed, which wanted independence from Rio de la Plata, or at least much autonomy, and it became a large part of the Federalist faction that wanted the provinces of the United Provinces would be autonomous and be able to have their own government, kinda like the United States of America. They fought against the Unitarios, who wanted a more centralized state, because of the tensions between the Federalists of the Liga Federal and the Unitarios of the United Provinces of Rio de la Plata. The latter did not help the province when the Portuguese came to attack the League to integrate them into Brazil. Because of their superior numbers and equipment, the Portuguese quickly conquered Montevideo, but had to fight on the countryside for 3 years to conquer the whole of the area. But while this was happening, another group of Federalists overthrew the centralist government. After the situation had stabilized in Argentina, they wanted to go to war with Brazil to reconquer the territory they had lost, and they soon did. Both sides started to march towards Uruguay and started fighting, but soon became a stalemate. This war gave both countries large and economic consequences, and both nations wanted to end the war as soon as possible. None of the countries wanted the other to have control of the region, so decided to make it an independent state called Uruguay. The Unitarians also recaptured Buenos Aires and started going out to kill federal opposition, but they were defeated by the Federals, who captured Buenos Aires again. Soon, the rest of Argentina was also under their control. The Federalists, who were now in control, renamed the United Provinces of Rio de la Plata into the Argentine Confederation and made it into a confederation in which the provinces of Argentina had control, except for in questions of international trade, military, and a few more. The country did also not have any head of state, but the governor of Buenos Aires, Juan de Manuel Rosas, had control over all of the aforementioned things. But the Unitarians were not defeated, and because of the autonomy of the provinces, it was hard to do so. Argentina also declared war on the Peru-Bolivian Confederation, along with Chile, when the Bolivian dictator Andrés de Santa Cruz conquered Peru and divided it into two and made a confederation with them. This caused the other nations in the area to feel threat of this new confederation, and this was especially true for Chile. Chile and the Peru-Bolivian confederations were also economic enemies, fighting for trade in the region. The situation became even worse when the confederation removed a trade agreement between them and Chile that Bolivia had had before the confederation. They also increased the Chilean trade tariffs on some goods by over 2,000%. A former Chilean president in exile also captured a few ships and raided the Peru-Bolivian Confederation's ships. Santa Cruz tried to negotiate with Chile to avoid a war, but they demanded the dissolvement of the Confederation, which was too much for them, and when the terms were denied, Chile declared war. While Argentina did not initially go to war with the allies of Chile, Santa Cruz were supporting their enemies in the Unitarians, and a few months into the war, Argentina went against the Peru-Bolivian Confederations. While Chile and Argentina were allies from earlier, a major statesman, Portales, in Chile, and the de facto leader of Argentina, Rosas, did not like each other, and that made it so joint operations were not made between the two nations. In Chile, most of the public did not like the war, which it deemed unnecessary. This was also the case with Chilean commander, which captured Portales, and later one of his captains killed him, while they were being defeated by a Confederate army. The Chilean government used this to make their population believe it was Santa Cruz who killed him, which turned many of the people's opinion on the war to a positive. But even with Portales dead, Argentina and Chile did still not fight together. Chile started a naval invasion of Peru, but they were soon surrounded and had to make peace to save themselves, So they did. But when they returned to Chile, the leaders were thrown in jail for this, since the Chilean government wanted to continue the war. The Chileans continued their attack, and soon after the Argentinians captured the Uruguay region. Chile captured Lima and the Confederation, and the war was over, with Argentina gaining a bit of territory. During and after the war, the French made a naval blockade of Argentina, blocking the nation's trade. This was in part for another conflict, the Uruguayan Civil War. In Uruguay, there were two parties fighting for power, the Colorados and the Blancos, and the Argentine Confederation supported the former, even though they helped the Colorados against the previous threat under the former government. At first, the Colorados were elected, and in the next election, the Blancos, but when this happened, the Colorados rebelled. The Blancos started an attack with the help of Argentina against the Colorados, who were aided by the Argentine Unitarians, France, and Brazil. But Colorado's forces were stronger and defeated the Blancos, and the Blanco leader fled to Argentina. But Rosas did not want the Colorados in power, so he, along with the Blancos leaders, planned a new attack on Uruguay, while the Colorados did the same thing, but for Argentina. When the two armies clashed, Argentina and the Blancos were victorious and laid siege to Montevideo. At the same time, the French and now also the British blockaded Rio de la Plata basin once again. The siege was long and wearisome for the armies and lasted 9 years. This was most likely because of the French and British having large naval superiority in the area and could easily resupply the city. They also helped defend the city by sending in troops. But after a few years, the Europeans left the city and it looked like the city would be captured. But there was a new conflict. One of Rosas' governors, Justo José de Urquiza, who was the governor of Entre Rios, betrayed him and started an uprising. This brings me to what was Rosas' goal with all of these wars, and the war soon to break out. He wanted to unify Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and parts of Bolivia and parts of Brazil, or what was the former Spanish viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata. This was his goal with supporting the Blancos, and probably also with attacking the Peru-Bolivian Confederation. Rosas had also aided many rebellious groups and uprising in these countries to try to divide them and later incorporate these smaller states into Argentina. Brazil, one of the, if not the most powerful nation in all of South America, was starting to fear the ambitiousness of Rosas and his visions for Argentina and intervened in the Uruguayan Civil War, aiding the Colorados. The Empire of Brazil had also started to ally themselves with Bolivia and Paraguay to make them stop Argentina from invading these countries. With the Empire now supporting the Colorados, they invaded Uruguay to free the capital. But the Colorados and the Argentinian rebels were already on that, and they were closing in on the city with Argentinian regiments gone back. The Colorados outnumbered the Blancos 2-1, and that was only the Colorados outside of the city. With the Brazilians blocking the sea, their navy, there was not much to do for the Blancos attacking Montevideo, but to surrender, so that's what they did. With the main army of the Blancos and the combined army of Brazil, the Colorados, and the Argentine rebels, which now am I going to call the Ally Army, easily conquered the rest of Uruguay, and the Colorados regime was now fully in control of the country. After the defeat of the Blancos in Uruguay, the Allied army continued into Argentina. Where they advanced, the Argentina made little to no resistance, knowing that it would need an entire army and a good position to defeat the Allied army. There was only a single battle between the two armies before the Allied army was almost outside Buenos Aires, and it had only been to buy time. But the battle was unavoidable, and the two armies soon faced each other and were fairly even in numbers, with Rosas' army having the high ground. But most likely because of bad morale, the Allied army, mostly consisting of Argentine rebel provinces of Entre Rios and Corrientes, and the Unitarians, won the battle, and Rosas who had led the army, escaped, resigned, and fled to the UK. Urquiza, one of the rebel leaders, now became the president of the Argentine Confederation. But he was unliked by the Unitarians, because he was a federalist like Rosas, so they felt like not much is saying. Urquiza also gave Buenos Aires less power, and this was unpopular in the province, which rebelled and formed the state of Buenos Aires, separated from the Argentine Confederation. The Confederation tried to reintegrate Buenos Aires both with diplomacy and military, but both failed. But after further hostilities, the Confederation attacked again and semi-reintegrated Buenos Aires into Argentina. But even more hostilities came, and another conflict came. Now, with a victory for Buenos Aires, and the Unitarians who ruled there reformed the Argentine Confederation and renamed it the Argentine Republic, with Buenos Aires in it, and Bartolomé Mitre, the leader of Buenos Aires, was elected president. Well, that's all I have for you today. Come back next time for the next video about Argentina.